it's a different world for products now, especially when, again, talking about the IoT space. It used to be, you design a toaster, you build a toaster, you sell a toaster, and then that toaster goes out on shelves, and then it you never touch it again. Occasionally you'll get some like warranty calls or support maybe, but what consumers are expecting now when they buy most products is that that product is actually going to get better over time.
Right.
That I'm purchasing, this smartwatch, let's say. I don't have one, but if I did, it'd be right there. And I'm going to purchase it, but I'm purchasing it with the assumption that there's going to be new features coming. And I think that's a mindset shift that a lot of businesses are still struggling to embrace. That I can sell a smart toaster that doesn't do everything right away, and then I can incrementally gather feedback from my users, see what they use the most, see what they like, what they don't like, and then incrementally improve on it over time. But it's a totally different business model for a lot of companies.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Meany Bernabe Show. I am your host, Meany Bernabe, and today we have a very special guest on the show. We have Ben Jacques on the show from SpinDance, which is a firm that helps architect and build software for connected and smart products. So excited to have him on the show. We are live. The benefit of that is that you get to ask your questions and post your comments and participate in the conversation. So I definitely encourage you to do that. So with that intro, let's bring Ben onto the stage. Hey, Ben, how's it going?
Hey, Manny, going really well. How are you?
Very, 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 very well. Hey, thanks for coming on the show. I thought a good place to start would be to start to talk about, folks' appreciation for what is possible with AI at the edge. I feel like AI IoT. There's been a lot of hype behind it. There's been some uncertainty in terms of what really is possible with AI. Give us a sense of how business unit leaders are thinking about that. Do they feel like there is something there, or are they still waiting on the sidelines for some of the technology to become a little bit more mature?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. It's probably one of the most exciting things about this field is just how rapidly things change and move. And it is, software is a rapidly changing environment already. The machine learning world has been insane to try to keep track of what all is changing and what's happening. And so it's not surprising for a lot of business leaders kind of just waiting to see like where are things going to go. But it is at a really cool spot where we're seeing a lot of companies embrace it and do some amazing things at even at the edge for AI that I honestly didn't believe was possible even a few years ago. To be able to see these tiny machine learning models running on these tiny embedded devices is just phenomenal. I actually had a kind of a fun use case. It was it was during 2020 because it was during the shutdown when I was working from home all the time. I had a little Arduino Nano Sense that I had laying around, and it has a ton of sensors built into it, but just a little microprocessor. And I wanted to see if I could detect issues with my pool pump just from listening to the audio. Because every time I walked outside, I could say like, oh, my filter's getting clogged, or it's too low on water, or all of these things that I could hear instantaneously and knew what was going on. I was like, I wonder if I could do this with a machine learning model. And sure enough, I could. And then to be able to deploy that model right onto this, $1.50 microcontroller was mind blowing. And I think that's been one of the coolest things to see.
And what? How's the sale? I guess if someone's coming to SpinDance and they want to develop a connected product, set up all the sensors and the connectivity, that's one thing. But then you might say like, hey, there's an opportunity to leverage machine learning and AI here. When you present that use case or that opportunity or that option to business unit leaders or folks that are in charge of budgets, are they open to that conversation? Do they kind of appreciate that maybe AI can be helpful here? That it could be something other than just buzzword and actually create some value for the new product. How are they receiving that messaging?
Yeah, so since we, in the consulting space, we work with so many different customers and industries. We get people all across the spectrum. First, for a lot of companies that are coming in sort of more in that like startup realm, they get it. Like AI is part of their product and it's what they believe in and it's what's actually making their product valuable. And so they're coming to us with a lot of knowledge already and we're kind of helping them shape up the business case for it. Other times we come in with customers that they get a directive from maybe their CTO that says, "Hey, we need to do machine learning," which is like, okay, how do you start? And I think that's the case where a lot of times we'll have to start with some of those upfront services to say what problems are you actually trying to solve, and are those problems actually valuable to either your business or your customer. Some of the machine learning that we do is just to benefit the business. There's so many things happening in that space to unlock business potential internally, but there's also all of these use cases for your end user that it's opening up to. And so trying to navigate through those initial conversations of like, how much do you know already? What are you actually trying to solve? And how can we help bridge that gap to make sure that all of those pieces are coming together into a solution that's actually going to be successful? Because that's what we all want.
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction because you're parsing out the startups from the more established firms.
Mhm.
How else are they different in your experience working with startups versus the more established folks trying to get into AI and machine learning for the first time?
Yeah, I think there's a few things just from the business side. Like startups tend to move really fast and like get really excited and want to see progress. Where working with some of the bigger firms, it's a long cycle to get to a place where you're convincing the right people that this is actually valuable and it's not just snake oil. Machine learning is one of those interesting things where some technologies, if I start talking about like a React Native mobile app development environment, most people are going to gloss over and not have any idea what I'm talking about. But machine learning and AI, everybody's heard about it, and everybody
Right.
kind of comes into the game with preconceived notions of, either my Google Home or my experience watching Terminator growing up. And so everybody's coming in with these different preconceived notions of what it is. And so what we want to do is really help people understand what it actually is and the value that it actually brings and how that can really impact a business, which again, there's so many options with it that's the hard thing of trying to get somebody like, where do you actually want to apply it in a place that makes sense? It's not the right solution for everything.
That's a great point. I also found that as well. AI, you're right, has a lot of baggage. It's already been defined in somebody's mind before you start talking about it. So, as an AI and machine learning practitioner, I think you just have to level set and say, hey, when we talk about AI, we're referring to this.
Yep.
And I think to your second point in terms of how to make it applicable and relatable to business folks is I always try to give an example of AI machine learning within their space, within their industry, maybe a peer or competitor, saying like, hey, like in this instance, this is how AI was used. Here's like kind of like a good example, and that helps people. That helps to ground people in terms of where we are when we're talking about AI and machine learning.
Yep. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Those use cases are really, really compelling for a lot of people. And when it's specific to your industry, not just, hey, Tesla made a self-driving car, you can do that too. Well, most businesses probably can't because it takes a lot of time and money to get there. But something that it's a really applicable business case where you see it in your own business, or like you mentioned, showing what a competitor is doing and how they're starting to gain an edge in the market in front of you because of that. And opens up a lot of doors for people to say, okay, I can see other people doing it. I want to do it too.
And then I think you also touched on an interesting topic too, which I would call internal sales. So it's
Yeah.
what I found. There's usually a team that's leading a new AI and IoT initiative, but that team has to work with other groups in IT and finance and marketing to get buy-in to get resources and support for their
Yep.
initiative. And oftentimes that's a big part of the project of the initiative for especially the more established firms. So, aside from being very clear about what is AI, what the value is, any other tips that you can offer to leaders trying to make that internal sale to help them get folks on board and get more resources and time allocated their way?
Yeah, that is probably one of the biggest struggles in our industry, because that same issue that exists for AI exists for IoT for a lot of
Ah,
companies. Nobody really knows who owns IoT. Is it a product? Is it IT? Is it the development group? Like who is the owner of the vision of IoT, and who's the owner of the vision of AI? And so for us, a lot of times it's trying to find the right person for that's really interested in it and gets the value, but they're also, if we can find the person that gets the business, and those two people can work together to help sell the message of here's what's really possible. Like we're going to skip all the hype. We're going to skip all these promises that AI will solve all of your problems and make you 10 times more profitable. And we're going to get to the heart of what problems you're really trying to solve and where this technology comes in. But getting the right people in there where we can talk about our expertise in machine learning and they can talk about their expertise in their particular domain, it really makes this great combination that is a lot easier to talk about it.
right. No, I think so long as you have that at the top of your list as you're getting going with AI and IoT, that you have to do this internal sales, or you have to build a coalition of sorts of folks that are going to help support your vision and your idea and drive this forward.
Yep.
I think you're going to be off to a good start. So we talked about the interests amongst business unit leaders and that being a little bit more shored up, and how to do that as well. Let's talk about the technology side.
Yeah.
For a long time, it was really hard to implement some of this stuff at the edge, with IoT. Getting the models in a format that works on some of these local devices was tough. Getting that data back to a central repository where you can work with it was tough. Tell us about what's happened in the eco landscape the last, say, year or two, that has made this harder, or where you're maybe you see some gaps for additional tooling.
Yeah. So it's been so fun to watch this because I got into this space probably 6 or 7 years ago now, and trying to get just a development environment set up on a Linux box with a GPU was like a week or two of work just to write your first line of code. And now there's this plethora of machine learning services that are out there today. And I 5 years ago, I would have probably not believed you if you said we'd be sitting here today talking about running object detection models on a tiny microprocessor with a camera. And yet here we are today, and I was actually playing with one yesterday, the little ESP32i, and the things that it can do are just phenomenal. And so I think, kind of coming back to that technology side, there's there's a ton of things that have happened now to make it way easier, which is awesome. So tools like Edge Impulse is one that we've partnered with them a number of times. And one of the things that they released last year, which was super cool, and I'm still excited about it, is their Eon Tuner, which is you can take this data set, you can use one of their models or bring your own, and then tell it like, hey, I need it to run this fast. I've got this much ROM and this much RAM available. And it will run through a ton of optimizations to figure out, here's the best accuracy you can get with those parameters. To do that type of work manually before was such a long and painful process. So this like rapid development cycle that has opened up because of the technology that's there, um, I think is one of the things that's most exciting for me. The thing that's most challenging right now is there's so many players in this market that if you want to go out as a business leader or a technologist in a business and say, I want to get into machine learning, so I'm going to search engine that up and see what's out there, it's overwhelming, and it's hard to navigate everything that's out there.
Tell me more about Eon Tuner. That's very interesting because for folks that aren't familiar with the process, first you have to get the data, you train a model, and then you deploy that model.
Yep.
And your value is going to come from when you deploy that model and you start generating predictions and you put that in front of a user. But
Yep.
where that model is going to be deployed is sometimes a question mark. It may vary, and there are oftentimes limitations, especially when it comes to edge and IoT. So
Yep.
Ion Tuner is helping you sort of collapse all of that work into one step and say, hey, you want this level of prediction accuracy, which is what we want from the model,
Yep.
and you have these limitations on the hardware side in terms of where it's going to be deployed. So based on all of that, we're going to optimize all of this. We're going to do some hyper tuning and parameter searching, and this is the
Yep.
ideal model that's going to give you the best of all worlds. Is that right?
Yep. Yep, exactly. And it, will pick, how much you want to quantize your model or do some of these optimizations that really takes a lot of the legwork and out of the things that we used to have to do manually.
Yes.
And those same types of things exist in a lot of cloud tooling today too, like AWS SageMaker. If you're building a model for the cloud, you can say, here's the parameters of hyper, or the bounds of hyper parameters that I want to give. SageMaker, you'll go out, run a bunch of implementations of my model and figure out what works best for me. So
Right.
the fascinating thing is that we're starting to use machine learning to optimize our machine learning training, which is really kind of like a, I don't know, almost this meta space to
Meta
get
kind
into.
of thing,
It's
right?
really exciting.
Where are the biggest pain points for data scientists in the workflow? Do you think so? You know, 3 years back, I feel like it was all about deployment, like getting my model from a Python R version into something that I can put on the website or into a machine. That was always painful, but it seems like companies like Edge Impulse are coming in, or they're helping with that. Where do you think the big pain points still exist?
Still in the data side,
Yeah,
gathering
rendering.
gathering the right data, and having good, accurate labeling of that data. Which again, there's been a ton of advancement in that space for like to have AI assisted labeling, or we've created a lot of better models that require less data. So there's kind of this convergence of our data tools are getting better, our models are getting better at learning with less data. And so we're getting to a good spot, but it is still really hard to collect the data.
Right.
In some specific cases. We actually did a project for a company that was working in the precision livestock farming space, and to be able to go to a farm and gather a bunch of image data on farm animals is still really hard to do. No matter what
Right.
tool
Right.
you create, there's still this physical gathering of data that
Right.
takes sometimes a lot of effort, especially in the IoT space.
Like, move over, cow. We're trying to get
Yeah.
this shot right here.
Yep, exactly.
Very neat. You mentioned Edge Impulse. You mentioned AWS SageMaker. Like, what's your ideal tech stack? If you're building something from scratch, from raw data to deployed model, what else is in that tech stack?
Yeah, so as an IoT company, we use AWS a lot, and I think that's one of the pieces that people can miss when they're like all in on AI, is that your AI models or whatever it is that you have running at the edge needs this whole IoT ecosystem to be successful. So you've
Right.
got to be able to deploy updates to the device. You've got to have security built into it. You've got to have connectivity to be able to either deploy a new model or new weights once you've learned to do things, or to be able to collect some user feedback. And so having a full stack where you can get all of your IoT benefits and the AI benefits that come with it really complemented, is where a ton of the value, I think, is going to come in the future. I think AI and IoT are continuing to converge, which is why we see more, hashtag AIoT in the world, because that's probably the future. So to answer your question, um, because we use AWS a lot already for the IoT stack, it's really has served us really well. It's nice to have the cloud components of something like SageMaker in there. SageMaker is awesome for being able to develop cloud hosted models. And they've moved a lot more into trying to get into the edge space, but I don't know that it's really matured enough yet. So if I'm talking about an IoT project and I want to run my model in the cloud, I think SageMaker is probably my default stack that I'm going to go to, because it just integrates so nicely with everything else that we're doing in that space. But when I get to an edge deployment and I'm really looking at, I need an optimized model for this device, I'm going to turn to a tool like Edge Impulse. And the reason that I would go to a tool like that is because I get the source code out of it at the end. I think that's one. one prediction I'm going to make for the future. We'll see if the crystal ball holds true. But I think a lot of the players that are working in this proprietary space, that we have our proprietary models and our proprietary black boxes, I think we're going to see those decrease over time. The industry is just moving too fast for a single company to keep up with everything moving in that space. So when you see a company embracing the open source tools, embracing the open source frameworks like TensorFlow or scikit-learn, and you actually get to use those in their tool chain, and then you get the code out at the end that you can integrate with the rest of your IoT stack,
Right.
uh, that's where the value comes in. Because what I tend to see is like, hey, I've built this model. I know it can run on this device because I've optimized it for how much the specs of this device are. I say, hey, what happens if you need to do an over-the-air update? What happens about the rest of your control firmware that needs to run alongside of it? It's like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. So you got to have all of those pieces coming together.
That makes sense. You like AWS, you like Edge Impulse, and you like Edge Impulse in particular because it gives you the source code after you're done training your model.
Yep.
And everybody wants their source code, right?
Yep.
Like everybody, like if you're a good engineer, you want to dig into the code,
Yep.
hack further, or just to make sure you have it in
Yep.
case that vendor goes out of business, or you have to like update it later on. But that makes sense. Any as you're looking at tooling, any other factors come into play in terms of you picking a one tool over another?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting to me in the data world is, for software for a long time, we've finally embraced source control. That wasn't a thing for a long time in software development, and we've learned that we have to be able to link a specific error message that happens or something that happens in our device, in our cloud, in our website back to a version of code that was running. Otherwise, it just makes it impossible to debug anything.
Right.
The same thing I think has to exist in the data world. That if you can't link your model that you've trained back to the exact data set that it was trained on, if you have no version control for your data, it's just this, we like to call it here at SpinDance a data swamp. A lot of people talk about these data lakes, but what we often found is a lot of customers with data swamps, that nothing makes sense, nothing's organized, nothing's versioned, nobody knows where the model came from, you can't reproduce the results. So for me, I'm looking at the tooling to be able to say I can always link my data to my model and reproduce those things. That's gonna make a production stable deployment process into the future, as opposed to like, I hacked together a model and deployed it out there and it works. See, AI is awesome. And then something breaks and you don't know why.
Right. I think people underestimate how much iteration is involved in developing a good model. How many, like, you have like 50 different models that you're testing out, and some of them you reject because they're not robust enough, others are not precise enough, others can't be deployed. And so you need to keep track of all that, and it's important to keep track of the key ingredient into those models, which is the data,
Yep.
as one factor. That data, I guess provenance, I would call it. How are you tracking that? Is that through AWS SageMaker as well?
Sometimes. So like SageMaker is not very opinionated on how you do a lot of things, which for some things I love. You can log in there and open up a Jupyter notebook and you can deploy models directly to production from within there by executing a cell and nobody can know,
Right.
which is awesome for development, terrible for production. And so it also doesn't have a whole lot of opinion on where you get your data or how you get it. So there's some open source things out there like DVC, data version control, is an awesome package that tries to answer some of those questions for us when we're working with kind of some of those bigger data sets. There's ways to version things in AWS S3 buckets and version your labels that kind of has to be built still. I think there's more services emerging around that, and we're going to continue to see more. That was another feature that Edge Impulse added to their platform last year, which is one I asked for a lot. Like, hey, I can't just work with a data set. I need to have versions of data sets that I can jump back to and see what was happening. So sometimes we're still building those tools ourselves, but I think we're going to see more more options out there to really see the data world embrace version control in the same way the software world finally has.
Very important. And I think as AI and machine learning practitioners get more scrutiny from regulators and lawmakers, we're going to have to be able to show that tracking that receipt, right? Like, oh,
Yep.
this model was built with this algorithm, yes, but then also with this specific data set, and
Yep.
we know it's a clean data set, and here's the receipt, and we have to be able to show that. So
Yep.
for sure, an opportunity there. I have a question here from Quentin that I'll bring up onto the screen. I'm curious if Ben can think of any areas where we might be expecting too much of AI or jumping into it too quickly. Good question from Quentin. Ben, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we see this a lot where, people, like I said, people come with a lot of preconceived notions about what AI can do. And sometimes when you're working with customers that now have AI built into their life. So you can go talk to your smart speaker and have conversations, or you can look at a Tesla driving down the road by itself, and they think, hey, I want to do that too. And you're a company of 10 people. Uh, it's probably not reasonable. And so I think trying to set some expectation of what's possible for the right sized customer is one of the things that we tend to run into, where you know customers want to have everything right away, which is not surprising. That's what we all want, right?
Right,
In software development and AI, whatever it is.
right,
And so being able to jump in and get to those, get to the right solutions at the right time is one of the biggest challenges. Um,
I,
so like it's a specific example is, we work in Holland here. We've got blueberry farms everywhere. And so just for fun, we built a mobile app that could take a picture of a blueberry bush, and it would classify how ripe all the blueberries are and then count them on the bush, so you could get
mm,
an idea of like how much your yield was at, and then also get a good prediction of how the optimal time for harvest, where you have the most ripe blueberries, the least underripe, and the least overripe. And it was not super complicated to build a model for blueberries, but if somebody came to us and said, I want this to work for every kind of fruit tree, all of a sudden that totally changes the game of like how you do your data collection and what your
right.
model looks like, and some of those things. So trying to understand, like, just because you were able to train it for blueberries doesn't mean that model automatically works for all fruits.
Yeah, yeah. The how well your model generalizes. I feel like
Yep.
that question comes up all the time in my
Yep.
projects. It's like, yeah, I have this machine, but it's a little bit older than this other machine, or it's
Yep.
slightly different. Will it generalize? It's always tough. And Quentin, I would say it's what I find is I oftentimes get a misdiagnosis of the solution to a problem with AI. So someone comes to me and says, "Hey, we'd like to add AI machine learning to this particular business unit." And then we start really digging into it, and it's not really an AI problem, it's a strategy problem. So they're losing market share because they don't have the right product in the marketplace. Or sometimes it's an automation problem. So you don't need AI, you need to digitize this part of your workflow and be a little bit more efficient here. And so I feel like there's oftentimes people coming to me and they want an AI solution, but you dig a little bit deeper, and actually they don't really need AI. It's something different that they need, and to get them where they need to be. Have you found that too, Ben?
Yeah, definitely. So before I worked at SpinDance, I worked in the manufacturing world, and there was people that kind of thought, in manufacturing process automation, AI was going to take over everything. And there's certain problems that it is really good at, and certain problems that traditional computer vision is phenomenal at. And being able to figure out and parse between those, it takes experience, and it takes a lot of uh, just understanding what you're really trying to solve, and understanding machine learning enough to know what its capabilities are, and what's there. So I saw a lot of people wanting to go all in on it and be like, whoa, like, let's look at what makes sense. Pump the brakes a little bit.
Yeah. Very neat. Ben, I wonder if we can talk about AI and edge product development in the context of testing it with users. This is something that I always try to do is let's put something in front of a user and see if there's something interest there, or is it just us data scientists building something that's cool that we think it's fun but isn't really going to be well received by the user. How do you think about that? How do you think about getting that user input and making sure you're building something that's going to make the user's life interesting and not just sort of something interesting from a technical perspective?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and this is something we run into in just the general software development world a lot, where our software developers get really excited about a piece of technology, and
Right.
we do a lot of agile development, and so we get to our sprint reviews, and like our developers are like, I want to tell you all about this specific database migration framework that I found, and we watch our customers' eyes glaze over. What it really comes down to is, most of the end customers don't really much care about machine learning or AI at the end of the day. They really want to know, are you solving my problem or not? And so I tend to not even talk about it with them, as an end user. It's like, are you solving my problem or are you not solving my problem? How you solve my problem, I don't care. That's your job. And so I do think there's been a lot of companies that have tried to market AI like, hey, our product is AI enabled or AI awesome, and it kind of just goes in one ear and out the other ear. It's really, are you solving my problem or not?
I really like that quite a bit. I follow a similar approach when we put new prototypes in front of customers. We don't tell them where the AI is or where the machine
Yeah.
learning is. We say, hey, like here's like a new workflow. Can you test it out and tell us if you find it interesting? And then if later on if they mention like, oh, that suggestion there or that autofill there was pretty interesting. Okay, that's good to note that there's some interest there from an AI perspective. But I think you're right. Just leading with what are the pain points that you're trying to solve. What is the end user going to benefit from the solution, and just forget about the AI. I think that's a really good way to go.
Yeah, and I struggle with it too because I love talking about the technology, but you got to always know your audience.
Yes, absolutely. And then on the business value side, how are you thinking about um, coming up with an estimation of that famous equation return on investment? Right, like the investment is always to me. There's little variance there. It's pretty clear what that's going to look like, but it's always the numerator in that equation that's a little bit tough. The return part. How do you think about estimating that? Do you have a process that you go by to get at that so that you at least have some sense that you're betting on something that's going to have a good payoff for the end customer?
Yeah, it's kind of different by every market and every product, but that return is a big question for a lot of companies. Like, and this is something that we, because of our experience in the IoT world, we try to also bring that into it, where there's a lot of different ways that you can make money with IoT products, and there's a lot of ways to not make money with IoT products. There's kind of the sense like, oh, I'm going to sell a connected air conditioner and I'm going to sell it for $100 more because it's premium, because now I can control my air conditioner with my phone instead of walking over to it.
Right.
And really, a lot of companies can make assumptions about what customers will pay for, but we uh, really emphasize with our customers testing as frequently as possible and working at a small scale. Always starting with prototypes. How do we get in there for a short amount of time and a short amount of dollars to show what's possible, what's not, and then find a way to get that in front of your end customers, to get out of your little bubble of, I want this to work, and so I'm going to convince myself that it's going to work and put it in front of somebody who really wants to see it. And so being able to market test some of those things early on to say, is this smart toaster that will never burn your toast, is somebody willing to pay $100 for that thing versus the $15 one that, once in a while I might get burnt toast, but that's okay with me. uh,
I'm surprised how big of an issue this is for some of my more mid-sized to larger customers.
mhm,
In terms of getting feedback from the customer as soon as possible, as early as possible, as cheaply as possible. I
mhm,
worked with a client. They had been working on a connected device, a medical device, and they had been working on this for some time. And we had some assumptions around predictive maintenance. Oh, they're going to want to pay for this and this and that. And I said, well, have you asked anybody? And there was like not a lot of response there. And I said, the
Mhm.
first thing we're going to do is we're going to go and talk to these customers and see if they're willing to pay for this. And we did get a lot of feedback or a lot of good hits on that, but we did get good signal on another service that they were interested in, which was
Mhm.
maintaining service logs, because there was like some new regulation that was kicking in, and the business unit leaders did not have a way to do that. So we were able to leverage the connected device to do that, to provide that service to the end customer. And you don't need to build out like a full out high fidelity prototype with all these predictive models and embedded in it to test that. You can just go quickly and ask someone and put together a low fidelity clickable prototype and get that information quickly.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, I mentioned this precision livestock farming project we worked on. That was a really cool one where the customer came to us with a lot of information already. They had historical data to show that, productivity in these farms was decreasing over time. And it was coming to a point where, like, in a few years, none of our farms are going to be profitable. There's something going on. And so they went out and just asked and just talked to a lot of people. And what they really came back with was farms are getting bigger, and the number of skilled workers that are there that know the industry is decreasing. So people, where they used to be able to look at an animal and recognize a problem, that just isn't happening anymore. And
Hmm.
so they kind of, these are age old things, but asking the five whys, asking the questions to really get to the root cause of the problem, and to say, like, if we could fix that problem right there, we can then back up through the data and say, that changes the trajectory from this to this. And all of a sudden, everybody sees the business value. The return is right there, and there's no questions about it. And then it's up to us to say, is that possible? And that's the other side of the equation is, can AI really do the thing that it needs to do? And that's where I find the most fun, because that's where we get to go in and really leverage technology to do amazing things.
That's a yeah, that's a I think a nice sequence. First, find out if there's a problem there, what's the value for solving that problem, and then try to solve it technically. Do you have a process for solving the feasibility, the technical aspect of that quickly, where it doesn't take 6 months to find out that a model's not going to train? Like, how do you think about doing that in a lean way to cycle quickly through these ideas to get to the one that's going to be both valuable to the customer, valuable to the business, and technically feasible?
Yeah, so we do run through kind of a pretty standard process for that. The One of the first steps is saying, you can't have a model without data. So let's go look at the data. Is there or are there existing data sets out there publicly available that we can leverage, to be able to start to answer this kind of question? It doesn't always have to be the exact data that you need, but is it pretty tangential to what you're doing? And can we
Hmm.
use that as like a 1 week proof of concept to say, we can take that data, train a model that generally gives you this results, and from there say, does it make sense to move to the next step? Okay, that worked really well. Let's go collect a small amount of or a subset of the data that you're looking at, and try to solve maybe one of the problems in that data, and then build on that to say, okay, still looking promising, let's move forward. And so it's kind of this iterative process where we don't want to jump in on, self-driving cars immediately, because that's going to be years of data collection and labeling to get to a spot where you feel comfortable with it. But what's the smallest chunk where we can demonstrate feasibility? And oftentimes what that does, to go back to our previous discussion point, that gives somebody in the organization a way to go sell it internally, to say, hey, look what we did, and look at the results that came out of this. And that helps move the process forward in a place where everybody feels confident in it, where you're not having a ton of skepticism, investing millions of dollars into something that you have no idea if it's going to work. We don't want to be a part of that, and our customers don't want to be a part of that.
No, I really like that. I like the notion of having something that you can use as an internal sales tool
Mhm.
for your champion, because it's always better to show, not to tell, when it comes
Yeah,
to
yep.
these sorts of things. You can just, exhibit the solution. In and Ben, I'm wondering in the projects that you've seen gone really really well for your clients and other parts of your career, what have you seen? If you do a postmortem, what have you seen as the biggest mistakes? What are the biggest drivers of these projects going sideways?
Yeah, I think it's trying to bite off more than you can chew, wanting everything right out of the gate. I
Mm,
think every it's a different world for products now, especially when again talking about the IoT space. It used to be, you design a toaster, you build a toaster, you sell a toaster, and then that toaster goes out on shelves, and then it you never touch it again. Occasionally you'll get some like warranty calls or support maybe, but what consumers are expecting now when they buy most products is that that product is actually going to get better over time.
right.
That I'm purchasing, this smartwatch, let's say. I don't have one, but if I did, it'd be right there. uh, and I'm going to purchase it, but I'm purchasing it with the assumption that there's going to be new features coming. And I think that's a mindset shift that a lot of businesses are still struggling to embrace. That I can sell a smart toaster that doesn't do everything right away, and then I can incrementally gather feedback from my users, see what they use the most, see what they like, what they don't like, and then incrementally improve on it over time. But it's a totally different business model for a lot of companies, and that's one of the things that I think a lot of our customers have struggled with, is assuming I have to build it all immediately, and there's no continued investment once I'm done building it.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. There are several macro forces that are coming into play. I'd say the commoditization of some of the expertise to build some of this hardware, lower costs from other regions of the world. They're all forcing manufacturers and appliance makers to be a little bit smarter in terms of what services and products they offer, and that has to be connected, that has to be tied to data analytics and IoT. But those are new skill sets for
Yeah.
those companies. And not only the technology part of it, which is like you need to be familiar with how to pull all this data together, how to keep it secure, how to build models off of that, how to deploy those models. Okay, that's the technical part of it. But then
Yep.
there's also the organizational maturity part of it, where they need to be able to put together a lean team to hack at this problem, quickly cycle through models and quickly put that in front of a customer and get feedback and cycle through 10, 15, 20 different types of business model and data science model variations to get to the optimal one and do that very very quickly. I find
Mhm.
that's also a big transition for a lot of these more established players.
Yeah, yep. And even from the IoT side, this is something we've been, struggling with for years, is getting our customers to see like how much of your business this impacts. If again, I'm going to keep coming back to toasters apparently today, but
You're
if
hungry. It's what this is what we do
yeah,
for 9 a.m. in the morning
yeah,
stream. You got breakfast on the mind.
right. But if you're a toaster selling company and you've never had to deal with customer support, um, for Wi-Fi provisioning on a toaster, that's a
Right.
totally different skill set, that and probably a new team that you need to build internally to know how to handle customer support cases that you've never seen before. How do you get the logs? How do you interact with your users in a way that you can actually help them with a more technical problem than any of your previous customers have faced before? So there's like this whole internal support side of things. There's the IT infrastructure side of it. There's ongoing maintenance and support and security questions and privacy questions and legal questions that it's a I hate this term digital transformation because it means so many things to so many people, but it is,
Right.
for many businesses, a total digital transformation of their business to move into the smart product space and or the AI machine learning space.
Right, but it's necessary. It's
Yeah. Yep.
it's an evolutionary thing. Like you're either
Yep.
going to be able to tap these trends, or you're not going to be around in 5, 10 years, or you're not
Yep.
going to be nearly as competitive.
Yep.
So let's flip that around. In the projects that have gone really really well, the clients that have had great experiences, what are the factors that have contributed to that? What are the factors that are present in the projects that do amazingly versus the ones that aren't so great?
Yeah, I think the ones that have gone really well are the ones that come with a great problem statement right out of the gate. It's not just a free for all of I want to do machine learning.
Mm,
The ones that really come in and say, I see the value, I have a problem. Oftentimes our best customers are the ones that are like, I'm not sure if it's gonna work. And I want you to help me figure that out because I don't have the expertise in house to be able to do that. And so if they come to us with some skepticism, that's actually really encouraging to me, where they don't know for sure that it's going to work, and we're approaching it in a way that's um, not all in on something that like you look back and it doesn't even make sense. So you could have a customer that comes in and says, I want to make this smart wearable that can detect allergens in the air, but my smart wearable that I'm selling today only has a microphone in it. Can you do that? And you're like, no. It doesn't make
right.
any sense. And so having
uh,
a specific problem coming into it, and reasonable expectations that we can manage is probably what the most clear underlying thing that has been the strongest indicator of success.
it sounds like the scientific process. You want somebody to come in with a hypothesis
Yep.
and to gather data and information to disprove or to prove that hypothesis.
Yeah, yep, exactly.
So that's very good. So you want to make sure you have a good problem statement. Let's say that's your hypothesis, and then you just want to have a mindset to say like, "Hey, we're going to test this out, and we're going to try to figure this out and see if this works for us."
Yes, exactly.
Perfect. That's great. That makes sense. There's a use case on the SpinDance website that I really liked, and this was around a product called UV Angel Adapt. I'm always looking for these instances of devices using AI in the right way, in a way that's not too gimmicky, in a way that actually creates value for a customer and differentiates a product. And I saw this, and I felt like this kind of hit the mark on that. Tell us about this use case. Tell us about how this came about, and tell us what we can learn from it.
Yeah, this was one that was super exciting to me. So UV Angel was a customer that we were working with. They make this Adapt product, which is a little UVC light that goes over top of keyboards, and its intended use case was to be able to sanitize keyboards, especially in shared spaces. So think dentist's office, hospitals. A high probability of germs being transferred, and and no way to really clean keyboards well. They're hard to clean, and they're hard to clean well. And so this light kind of detects when nobody's using the keyboard, turns on the UVC light, kills all sorts of germs and bacteria. Um, and this we were working with this customer before COVID-19 hit, and it turns out that UVC light is really effective at killing COVID, which is awesome. And so this customer was in a really good spot when when things started going south in the world. But they also had this issue where there was a couple of sensors in the device that were able to detect when there was motion nearby. So proximity sensors that weren't very smart. It was just, is there motion or is there not motion? And that was the original use case. And as hospitals had these things, they're like, man, we've got these connected devices. They're connected so that they can do fleet monitoring. They can be able to detect when UV bulbs are at their end of their life. You can also detect how often keyboards are being used, and there's a lot of cool use cases that the IoT piece of it brings. Um, but what hospitals also had was this regulatory requirement for physically cleaning the keyboards. So UVC light can neutralize a lot of stuff, but there's still gunk that builds up on keyboards over time, and they need to be cleaned. And there's actually in a lot of hospitals and dentist office regulatory requirements around that. And no way to really automate that today. It's probably most likely checklists, or somebody walking around with a tablet saying, yep, clean that device. So what we were able to do is actually use these existing sensors in an existing IoT product to unlock a whole new business value that wasn't there before. It was a need, it was a real problem that these hospitals and dentists had to be able to meet regulatory requirements. And in comes a product that has everything it needs already to do it, except the intelligence to determine what's actually happening. So we got to train up a model that could detect when you're typing on the keyboard, when you're wiping, cleaning it off, if you're just walking past it. And it went from presence, not presence, to actually I can identify cleaning, typing, walking by, bumping it, kind of all of these different scenarios, and doing it in a way that you wouldn't necessarily think about. Oftentimes people jump to, oh, I need to detect those things, I'm going to put a camera on there. And you think about putting cameras inside of hospital rooms, and all of a sudden there's a lot of concerns about privacy and questions. Put a couple of dumb proximity sensors on there, and all of a sudden you unlock a ton of value without impacting privacy for patients and things, which is really cool.
That's awesome. So you had this UV light, and it turned on, it turned off when there was someone using it, and it turned back on when someone was not using it. But then the
Yep.
hospitals wanted to also track when these keyboards were being wiped down. So
Yep.
then you added intelligence to the existing hardware, which is amazing. That's great. You
Mm-hmm.
just needed, some a model to deploy to the edge. That's great. So that the hospitals could keep track of when the keyboards were wiped down,
Yep.
so that when the inspector comes by and says, "Hey, have you been clean, keeping up to code? Have you been wiping down these keyboards?" The administrator could just say, "Yep, here's our log. Like this, these are all the 5 times this keyboard was clean,
Yep.
and here's like everything being cleaned up because we were able to track that." That's great. That I really
Yep.
like that use case.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome to see.
Very, very neat. Great. Ben, tell us how people can follow you, can track your progress, and can get in touch with SpinDance. What's the best way for folks to connect with you?
Yeah, so I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, connect there, head to our SpinDance website, and there's a way to contact us through that. There's also a lot of cool content that we put on there for various blog posts and things and webinars that we've done to kind of talk about it, because we get excited about this space. We love to help clients get to a spot where they're finding value, and they're finding cool opportunities to leverage AI. So those are great ways. And then we offer a lot of services around kind of those introductory pieces. If you're not sure how to start, being able to ask somebody with some industry experience for a low amount of effort and time can really accelerate things a lot. And I know you're kind of in the same space as well, that being able to leverage somebody else's experience to know what direction to head, it's a game changer when you can talk to an expert for even just 10 minutes. Sometimes can save you days and days or weeks and weeks of research. So it's kind of fun just to have those conversations. And I think that's what I love the most about this job, is talking to clients that are like, I've got this cool idea. I'm like, oh, that is so awesome. And whether or not you work with us long term or not, I just love having those conversations to see what people are doing, and how they're leveraging this kind of technology.
Right, and it's like, yeah, you have a cool idea, but look out for these 3 things.
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Very neat. Cool. Well, Ben, thanks for coming out on the show. Very much enjoyed our conversation. Folks, stay tuned for notes and a replay of this chat, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Cool. Thank you.